Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the City of Waterloo Special Council meeting Monday, October 18th, 2021 at 2 p.m. We'll begin with a roll call, please, beginning with Ward 1.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Hanmer, present.
Councillor Bodley, present.
Councillor Veith, present.
Councillor Freeman, present.
Councillor Henry, present.
Councillor present.
And the mayor's here too. That's all of us. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we are broadcasting from today, and many of us are gathering on, is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. A moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we paused to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. Moving on to item 4, disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing no hands go up, we move on to item 5, approval of minutes. We have one set of minutes there, and I'll ask Ward 1, Ward 2 to consider these.
Thank you. Councillor Hanmer moves the acceptance of the special council minutes, and I vote in favor.
Councillor Bodley seconds the minutes and votes in favor.
Councillor Veith, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, in favor.
Councillor Henry, in favor.
Councillor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Moving on to delegations. We have our friends from REAP Green Solutions here today, represented by Patrick Gilbride, Associate Director, Manager of Green Infrastructure for REAP Green Solutions. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you very much. Great. I see our slide deck's up. Perfect. So let me just jump right in. So good evening, or good day, Mayor Jaworski, municipal councilors and staff. I'm very happy to be here today and share with you some of the work we've been doing with your support. Next slide, please. As you may be aware, REAP's mandate is practical action in the community. Our work is guided now by a 10-year goal we adopted last year to support 10,000 meaningful actions by our participants. In our next slide, please. In our first fiscal year since we announced this goal, we made it almost 10% of the way. We can also report nearly twice as many supportive actions that are part of each person's sustainability journey. For example, attending a tree workshop counts as a supportive action. Planting a tree in your yard is a meaningful action, something that may be large or small, but have a meaningful impact. Next slide, please. This past year, we helped local residents plant over 3,000 native plants, trees, and shrubs that sequester carbon in the soil, capture stormwater, as well as provide habitat for urban wildlife. Demand for these programs is strong and growing. And we're happy to say we have entered into an agreement with the city's parks and water departments as of this past spring to be able to offer a backyard tree planting partnership to Waterloo residents. Next slide, please. We continue to raise awareness of the role of rain gardens in reducing stormwater runoff. And this year we supported homeowners in designing and installing 12 such gardens. We also worked with the City of Waterloo staff to create a demonstration garden planted with the help of volunteers at the City's Service Center on Lexington Court. As you know, we're also supporting residents in safeguarding our water resources on the outside and inside of their homes. In particular, we work closely with the region and local utilities to deliver home water reviews. During those home visits, we installed 216 measures on the spot that save water immediately and going forward. Next slide, please. One of the most important milestones for our whole community this past year was the development of our long-term climate action strategy endorsed by Council in June. The plan calls for us to transform the ways we move, build, consume, and relate to one another. A number of REAP's programs and services directly align with these goals. Next slide. Home energy evaluations are one such example of this, supporting homeowners in making their homes more energy efficient. Transitioning into this year, the federal Greener Homes program launched this past spring, and we are grateful to see those incentives helping to spur greater uptake of home energy upgrades. Next slide. Last year was the end of our 2-year Project Neutral initiative. In the second year of the program, close to 850 people logged on to find out what their carbon footprint was and how to shrink it. Not everyone follows up with us, but the ones that did reported over 100 climate actions taken through participation in the Project Neutral tool. Next slide. We managed to hold 3 in-person events last year with physical distancing in place. Otherwise, COVID pushed our workshops online. It was really interesting to see how many more people could participate that way, including appealing to audiences in other parts of Ontario, Canada, and even the world. Next slide, please. Our annual Zero Waste Challenge attracted participation even during COVID, and we were inspired by the posts that people shared what they learned in the process. The 7-day challenge started this past Friday, so if you haven't already, don't be shy about signing up with your mason jar. And not to dampen Mayor Dave's enthusiasm, but it doesn't have to be super competitive. The point is to have fun with it and just be more mindful and a little more intentional with your household waste. I'm doing the 30-day challenge this year, and I'm kind of glad we're only on audio and not video, because despite upsizing my jar, I definitely have my work cut out for me the rest of the month of October. Next slide. This chart shows our expenses at a glance. You get a sense of the diversity of the programs that we offer that address both climate change mitigation and adaptation. Next slide. And what's coming up? Looking ahead, watch for 3 new initiatives coming this year that fulfill a community need and get people engaged. Number 1, the local chapter of Tree Trust will provide professional arborist care for legacy trees, funded through donations. Secondly, we're collaborating with all of our municipalities to design a home energy retrofit program for Waterloo region, including financing for loans. And thirdly, Project Neutral is entering a new phase, working with high school students to cut carbon at home. Next slide. And so as we end this report on the fiscal year ending March 31st, we can't resist updating this bar to show you how many more meaningful actions our community has taken through our program since April 1st. We are well on our way to 10,000 actions, and we see how important that vision of a resilient, low carbon future is to all of us. Next slide. We end with our most important message. Thank you. None of the work we do would be possible without your support. Waterloo North Hydro provides core funding to REAP, and we are so grateful for that. That funding gives us the capacity to bring programs and resources to our community in support of the city's own strategic goals. We also wanted to say a very special thank you to City of Waterloo staff, whom we get to work with on a regular basis, including Sandy Little, Paola Mendez, Todd Chapman, Peggy Stevens, and Jeff Silcox-Childs. Together, we're helping people live more sustainably. So that's the end of my presentation, but I'm happy to entertain any questions that anybody has.
Well, thank you very much, Patrick. And I must say I'm off to the worst start ever in the Zero Waste Challenge, because I always tell everybody my special technique is this is the time when you, the week that you eat bananas, apples, fruits, vegetables, because you're pretty good to go with the green bin there. And I ran into trouble with grapes because they come in that container that's all crinkly and unfortunately has to go in the garbage. That's in my jar so far with few stickers from bananas and that, but yeah, that sort of really fills up the jar, that crinkly material. So off to a bad start, but nowhere to go but up, I guess, Patrick. Or maybe I'll have to get a bigger jar, but I'm not going to go that route.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you're enjoying the other co-benefits of maybe eating a little bit more fiber in your diet.
Yeah, we'll leave that one alone. I'll move on to the questions. I have Councillor Henry here, or is it Finn? We'll see who it is.
In this case, it's Councillor Henry. I think if you saw the picture from the last time we were able to participate in the Zero Waste Challenge, I think half of our bin ends up being dryer lint from the number of times I have to run the diapers through over the course of a week, and there's not much you can do about that, which is unfortunate. Patrick, question I had for you. I'm glad to know that we're continuing to make some progress on home energy, retrofits. Those are such a critical part of our transformation as a community that we have to do to use less energy and have the energy that we use be zero emission. And I'm glad that we're working together across the region on coming up with a program to help residents do that. Do you have a sense at this point of what the 2 or 3 key barriers you're finding are for residents taking that significant step of investing in changing the way they use energy at home, in terms of switching away from natural gas or dealing with windows or envelope changes? Do you have a sense of what those top 2 or 3 barriers that we need to look at are?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to presuppose some of the research that's going on as part of that project, but we certainly know that upfront capital is a barrier for some people, especially people who don't necessarily have it in their budget. So I think that's part of what's being explored. To be able to get people to take the plunge and engage in some of the retrofits that you were talking about. So I think that's a key one that we're looking to address through this pilot study. There's a lot of research being done, but the key ones are always financing is one small piece of it, but the key piece that we like to think that we bring to the table is providing people the practical tools and knowledge, which is what we hope we're doing by providing that third-party impartial advice as part of the home energy evaluations. So that's another sort of key barrier, and the idea is to try and tackle these sort of in parallel and not sort of one at a time. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly there'll be more. You mentioned in your presentation that the recent federal incentives have increased uptake with those home energy audits. Can you give a little bit more detail? What kind of uptake are we looking at, and how well positioned is REAP and the community generally to be able to handle the volume that we're going to need to be able to run homeowners through that process and make the changes that we need to see?
Yeah, so I mean that announcement was made basically in June by the federal government. Since then, we had a huge sort of uptake in volume of calls coming into our organization. I couldn't tell you exactly what the wait list, but at some point over the summer, it was about 400 sort of people on our wait list. To put that in perspective, that's, on the order of, at least a, 500% increase or more from last year. So there's a lot of that program, despite the fact that a lot of the details weren't announced at the start of the program. We're definitely in catch-up mode, and we're training advisors. Unfortunately, it does take time to be able to bring people on stream to meet that demand, because it's basically, in order to pass all the certifications, you need to basically, it's a minimum 3-month sort of process that we go through. So we're in the process of getting that and starting to deal with some of the backlog, and brought back some of the advisors that we've had, from the early days of REAP, in the early 2000s. So, we're definitely sort of plugging away at it. I know all of the industry and other people who provide home energy evaluations in other community are experiencing that same sort of challenge right now. But we do feel confident that it is something that we're chipping away at, and we'll be able to hopefully work through in the next couple of months, especially in the winter months. This is when most people are thinking about this kind of things, when the weather starts to get cold.
Thanks, Patrick. That's helpful and good to hear. I asked that mostly from the perspective that traditional industry has good access to to government, to the ears of government on labor market indicators, on training needs, on sort of the human resource skill gaps piece, and the green energy sector is one that is a great economic opportunity in taking climate action. And I just want to make sure that we're sort of connecting the dots and being very clear about what the needs are, so that governments can also transform how we're supporting industry through this transition. So thank you very much for that extra detail.
Thank you.
And now over to Councillor Bonagor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski, I just first of all want to say thank you to REAP and the whole team for everything you do. I tell everyone I can how great my experience was with the home energy audit, and my blue in a box pollinators are doing great, so thank you. I did have a question though about your goals to kind of expand access to the home energy audits and home energy retrofits. And I'm just wondering, and you may not be able to answer this, but with those programs, are you mostly seeing owner occupiers taking part, or are landlords also taking part in these programs?
Thank you for the question. So we do definitely see demand from both. I don't have the statistics of exactly what that breakdown is and how it sort of compares with the larger information in the how that maps onto like per capita, like who's taking advantage of that. Certainly, I think the majority of people are the homeowners. I know certainly with our water evaluations, the region, we deal with a lot of sort of landlords, but I don't have that information on the energy evals, unfortunately. But I can certainly take that away and get that information for you.
I'd be fascinated to know, because I just know how much of a positive impact it's had on our energy use within our home. So if this was a program where we could kind of make sure landlords were aware, that would hopefully pass benefits on to tenants so that they could save on their energy as well. But yeah, if you could, I'd be curious to see that, and if there's any ways I can help get that word out as well, I'm happy to help. But that's it from me, Mayor. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely take that away. I've made a note here, and we can follow up with some more information on that.
Thank you. I don't see any further questions at this time, but certainly pass along our thanks to the entire team at Reap Green Solutions. And I do look forward to doing better in the Zero Waste Challenge, and we'll go from there. Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you.
Next up, we move on to item 7, which is the consent motion consisting of the 2021 Grant Update Report and the Health Valley Trail Agreement brought to us by Marcel and Louise, respectively. Does anybody have any questions on these items so that they're removed? Hearing none, I will look to Ward 3, Ward 4 to consider moving the consent motion.
Councillor Veith here. I'm happy to move the consent motion and vote in favor.
Councillor Freeman, I'm happy to second the consent motion and also vote in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Marcel, for making sure we pursue all those grants and for tracking them. And to Louise, I have never heard of the Health Valley Trail, so I spent some time on the weekend, not traveling it, but at least looking at it online. I'll travel it another time, but looks like a very intriguing trail for sure. Moving on to staff reports, item A, which is the 2022 Building Standard Fees and Charges report for our consideration, prepared for us by Beth and Angela and team. And does anybody have any questions for Beth on this one? Go ahead, Councillor Bonagor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. Beth, I couldn't help but notice in the report that our fees haven't changed in about 20 years. And I'm wondering if you could just give a little explanation as to how that came to be and to leave us sort of in this position today where we're basically trying to catch up to meet reality.
Sure, through you, Mayor Jaworski. I'll try and give a bit of background. Obviously, this is well before I was in this position. But if you take a look kind of back through the last report that was done, I believe in 2005, and the recommendation there was from staff that we don't increase our fees at all, just based on the cost recovery model, and everything was working great. We've seen a lot of construction volatility across the last 2 decades there. So I think just where we've looked at in the healthy point of our reserve fund, there wasn't really a need to increase those fees at all. And as well, just because of that volatility and some special projects, and looking forward at doing some of these big capital projects like the electrical vehicle fleet, or some of the other e-permitting initiatives that have taken place, that we also didn't look at reducing those fees.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
I see no further questions, Councillor Bonagor, so I'm wondering if you'd consider with your neighbor moving us forward on this one.
Certainly, it's Councillor Bonagor here. I'm happy to move the recommendation and I'll vote in favour.
Councillor Hanmer, I'll second the recommendations and I too will vote in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Beth and team, for putting that together with all the depth of information that helps us make a good decision to make sure things go smoothly over the coming few years. Next up, we have item B, the Rental Housing and Business Licensing 2022 Fees and Charges. And Grant Curlew has produced this report for us. There is no presentation. Does anybody have any questions for Grant? Hearing none, I might ask the Finance Chair to take us forward on this one.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy to move the motion and to vote in favor.
Councillor Bonagor, I will second the motion and vote in favour.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Grant, again for another well-written report to council. Moving on to item C, Cemetery Services 2022 fees and charges. A report prepared for us again by staff, by Rory in this case. There's no presentation. Does anybody have any questions for Rory on the cemetery fees and how they're moving forward and some staying the same? Seeing none, I think I will go with Ward 1 to Ward 2 to consider this.
Councillor Hanmer, I will move the recommendations that we accept the Cemetery Services 2022 fees and charges as presented, and I will vote in favor.
Councillor Bodley, I'll second the motion and vote in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Henry in favor.
Favour.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Rory, for the report. Moving on to item D, the 2019-2022 strategic plan, the 2021 progress report, prepared for us by Sandy Little, and today Sandy has a presentation for us. Welcome, Sandy.
Thank you very much. All right. Good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski, members of council, and staff. I'm here this afternoon to highlight for you the progress made this year on the implementation of the strategic plan. These updates are incredibly important for all staff, but especially for leadership and for council. This is an opportunity to highlight progress we've made as a team while shining focus on where we need to go in the future. Next slide. On June 24th, 2019, Council approved a brand new strategic plan to guide the corporation on a path for the current term of Council. As part of last year's update report, I introduced a new reporting framework to measure our progress on implementation of the strategic plan. The reporting framework consists of 3 components. 1, localization of the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. 2, ISO 37120 Sustainable Cities and Communities Reporting Framework. 3, business plan initiatives. All of these components are interrelated and can be mapped back to our strategic plan. This same reporting framework has been used as part of this year's update report. Next slide. The 6 pillars of our strategic plan can easily be mapped back to many of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Staff report CAO 2021-001 provided an update on how we as a corporation are doing in terms of localizing the SDGs. In other words, how are we ensuring the work we all do here at the city contributes to the UN Sustainable Development Goals? That report outlined a possible process for the corporation to follow to localize the SDGs, and it consists of 5 steps, of which we're already making incredible progress on. 1, awareness. Awareness is already happening in the organization through the creation of the strategic plan, as well as a number of strategic initiatives. 2, alignment. The strategic plan is well aligned to the SDGs. This council recognized the importance of identifying pillars that reflect the SDGs. 3, analysis. Analysis is well underway as staff is working with the University of Waterloo, as well as with the data collected through ISO 37120. Next slide. This is where we are as a corporation. We are in the analysis stage, heading to action, which is the 4th step in the process. This involves identifying the indicators and targets to measure our progress on localizing the SDGs. The fifth and final step in the process is accountability. Once we establish indicators and targets, we can then track our progress in terms of localizing the SDGs. Recently, staff has taken a major step in the localization of the SDGs by participating in work with the University of Waterloo. UW is in the process of completing a voluntary local review, or VLR, which examines the SDGs in light of the data collected through ISO 37120. That work consists of two components, the research component and the video component, of which many staff were actually involved with. It will provide us with some much needed baseline information of where we are in our work to localize the SDGs. This work is scheduled to be completed later this fall. All of the work being done will allow us to continue to make progress on localizing the SDGs, as well as forming a strong foundation for the next strategic plan, which will be critical to this work. Next slide. ISO 37120 Sustainable Cities and Communities consists of 104 indicators across 19 different themes. Examples of some of the data we collect includes final energy consumption of public buildings per year, percentage of population living in affordable housing, and annual number of public transit trips per capita. Staff has participated in 2 years of this work, and we've received platinum certification both years. We are starting to finally see this data come to life. Many of the indicators that we have reported on have 2 data points now, which allows us to start to analyze the data we've collected. However, this analysis is still in its infancy. We will need a few more years of participation in the reporting framework to be in a position to start to identify trends, create projections, and eventually targets, which will also assist with future updates of the strategic plan. Year 3 data collection will commence this fall and is scheduled to be completed by the end of first quarter of 2022. Next slide. The third and final component of the reporting framework is the status of business plan initiatives. I can report that we continue to make progress on furthering the outcomes of business plan initiatives. Detailed status of the business plan initiatives can be found in the appendix of the corresponding report. Of the 79 initiatives contained in the business plans, 11 or 13.9% have been completed. 35 or 44.3% are on track. 32 or 40.5% are delayed, and 1 or 1.3% are on hold or canceled. Of the initiatives that experienced delays, the following were noted as reasons for delay. COVID, 59.4%. Other, which includes delays related to technology and legislation, accounted for 28.1%. Staffing was identified as a delay in 25% of the delayed initiatives. Third-party delays accounted for 15.6%, and budget or funding, which also includes delays as a result of tendering, was identified as a delay in 12.5% of delayed initiatives. Next slide. Although there were some delays in business plan initiatives, staff continued to move forward on a number of fronts while pivoting and refocusing resources on emerging projects. This includes the recent proposed merger of Waterloo North Hydro and Kitchener-Wilmot Hydro, which is in the public engagement stage of the project. Initiatives such as these require staff to pause direction and move forward on new fronts. Other initiatives combine to make up one of the largest capital project programs for the city. These projects are nearing completion, and it is thanks to the hard work of staff, the perseverance of leadership, and the foresight of this council to help facilitate the conditions for these projects to be completed to meet the needs of our community. The expansion to WMRC is an approved initiative in the Facility Design and Management Services Business Plan and is a large-scale capital project that includes new multi-purpose courts, recreation studios, a walking track, and pool upgrades. The expansion will meet the current and future recreational needs of older adults. Next slide. The Eastside Library is another initiative in the Facility Design and Management Services Business Plan and is a large-scale capital project. This project will meet increasing demands due to growth and changing needs in the community. Some of the key features of this 15,000 square foot project include a large collaborator wing, 3-dimensional printing, children's programs, makerspace activities, and other activity-based programs. Next slide. The Albert McCormick Community Center Central Plaza is a new plaza park that includes a skateboard park, accessible basketball court, a splash plaza, play feature, public art, and a variety of gathering and seating areas designed to serve the surrounding neighborhood. We are already receiving positive feedback from the surrounding community regarding this initiative, which officially opened to the community in July of this year. One resident has noted that this new space is increasing connections amongst our youth. These connections are happening at a time when creating relationships is such a challenge. It is clear this space is appreciated and was needed in this ward. Next slide. The pavilion is located at the Ball Diamonds and soccer fields on University Avenue East. The pavilion project includes one accessible washroom and 4 gender-neutral washrooms. There is a multi-use room and some space that can be used for off-season storage. It is vital that we continue to move capital projects forward so we can continue to meet the needs of the residents we serve and maintain the quality of life our community is recognized for. Next slide. Not all of the work we do is captured by the business plans, as is evidenced by some of the projects that were included as part of the capital project portfolio. Staff has had to shift with changing priorities as new challenges emerged over the last year. This was especially true during the pandemic. COVID has a way of creating conditions for initiatives that are just below the surface to emerge as priorities. The first is under the umbrella of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, or EDI. The city is in the process of creating its first Indigenous Initiatives, Anti-Racism, Accessibility, and Equity team. We have also made progress on our own internal EDI journey. That progress was summarized as part of Staff Report CAO 2021-007. Lastly, we continue to move forward on a number of other initiatives related to EDI. Another essential area of focus is environmental sustainability. The approval of Transform Waterloo Region, our Community Climate Action Plan, and deeper GHG reduction targets marked a pivotal point in our environmental sustainability work. Work on our own corporate climate action plan is underway and will benefit from the hiring of the city's Senior Sustainability Officer. Earlier this year, the corporation created the first ever Environmental Sustainability Team, or EST. This team has representatives from across the corporation to streamline environmental sustainability initiatives. Immediate next steps include filling the role of the Senior Sustainability Officer in the Office of the CAO and collaborating with partners as part of the strategic planning exercise underway for Climate Action Waterloo Region to create next steps for implementation of Transform Waterloo Region. Housing and homelessness is another strategic initiative that has required staff to pivot and focus attention. During the pandemic and in response to social distancing regulations, service providers were forced to identify new locations to accommodate members of our vulnerable population. The work being done in our community is invaluable. Multiple partners are coming together to help our most vulnerable. When one of the sites right here in Waterloo opened its doors in 2020, they were able to provide housing to so many who didn't have that opportunity. The simple act of closing their own door to their own space was never appreciated more. Our very own staff providing bus tickets to a couple in need who were living unsheltered to access healthcare was so appreciated. These are the reasons so many of us are doing this work. Lastly, it's essential to highlight the human element in the work we are doing. The last 18 months have challenged all of us in ways we could not have imagined. The world is changing and we are changing along with it, while also working to make progress on the city's initiatives. Next slide. Although we are all more than 18 months into the pandemic, we continue to address and deal with ongoing challenges as a result of the pandemic. We saw earlier in the presentation that COVID was identified as a reason for delay for a number of business plan initiatives for various reasons. But staff has had to respond to work as a direct result of the pandemic that could not have been predicted at the time of completion of the business plans. Frontline staff in all departments has been instrumental in continuing the city operations during the height of the pandemic and beyond. For instance, finance staff were forced to modify so many internal processes to ensure services continued to be delivered, including payroll for staff, which we really all appreciate. Staff in economic development, and specifically in arts and culture, had to reimagine city events, and they've done an amazing job, which is evidenced recently by Lumen Light, with 8,000 in attendance at the end of September. Work related to COVID was not only about reacting, but also about being proactive. This is evidenced by the Supporting Our Local Economic Recovery, or SOLAR program, which was a combined effort of various divisions across the city. And economic development staff also developed the citywide COVID Relief Community Improvement Plan, or CIP, which furthers the strategic pillar of economic growth and development. Next slide. This is an image of the newly constructed Platinum Drive, a project that so many divisions across the city were an integral part of, with the construction led in large part by engineering services. This is just a small overview of all the work we're doing across the city. It is all of this work, plus all three components of the reporting framework, that provide a glimpse into the progress we are making as a corporation in implementing the strategic plan. Not only has staff worked to progress so many city initiatives forward, but council also played a key role in the work that's been done. Not only this past year, but the last 2.5 years of implementation of the strategic plan. As we look to the next and final update report for this strat plan, we will continue to make progress across the corporation amidst a number of challenges while moving forward together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy. You know, I really like this, the presentation, certainly, and the report. A real eye-opener at the start with the openness and transparency, showing the blunt truth of where we are, moving forward towards the end of the beautiful Lumen art display that we had at, that one was at Caroline and Herb, and just, you know, how much of the, how much else we took on. And, you know, I really say on behalf of council, I don't think we could be any more proud of the leadership of the city of Waterloo and staff of coming forward, moving all the projects forward, taking all the other projects on, and then all the impacts that we each had individually outside of work, and yet having accomplished so much. And when we look at the compendium report, the line-by-line items, when you unbundle it to look at why things were delayed, the reasoning is obvious. And I think that's really what makes us all proud of the team of City of Waterloo, of how even in a time of COVID, once every 100 years being hit, and yet we've made so much progress in this regard. So thank you very much, Sandy, for representing the entire, quote, team City Waterloo in all this. And I will just look to staff, I'll look to council to see if there's any questions. And I'm not seeing any, Sandy, but again, my true appreciation through you to the entire staff at the City of Waterloo for all that's been done to do whatever is possible to keep us on track and to zig and zag through the pandemic. So thank you very much, Sandy.
Thank you.
Next up, item E, the alignment of medium-term facility infrastructure needs with the energy roadmap. A report prepared for us by Kevin Van Oudegem, and there's a presentation up, and I'll just ask staff to move forward on the presentation. Sorry, I got so excited about Sandy's. I see Councillor Bodley as reminding me, and we'll go to Councillor Boddy considering moving Sandy's recommendation forward, receiving it as information.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jaworski. Councillor Bodley here, and I will move the report and vote in favor.
Councillor Veith here. I will second the motion and vote in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonigo in favour, and with many thanks to staff who've been working so hard.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Bodley, for pointing that out. And now we move on to item E, and I'll just invite staff in to do the presentation. One moment. There we are.
Mayor and the councillors, can you hear me?
You sound good, Sunda.
Thank you. So today, Kevin Van Oudegem and I are here to present the findings of the report about how we have aligned the medium-term facility infrastructure needs with greenhouse gas reduction and energy conservation roadmap phase 1. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Prevost presented a report to depict the needs to meet the greenhouse gas reduction target in year 2030 and in year 2050. This report is an extension of Mr. Prevost's report to demonstrate how the capital assets requirements and greenhouse gas reduction program can be integrated into one single program for the next 10 years. Next slide, please. The purpose of the presentation and the report is not only to receive the council support and endorsement, but also to demonstrate the preparedness of some of the key elements of the asset management continuum to resource planning and infrastructure funding distribution preferences in the future. And at this point, I would like to thank for all the funding that have been elevated in the past to help us move, and Sandy Little's presentation is an evidence to that one. So having said that, we also wanted to say the report that we have outlined in here has got 3 recommendations, and we would appreciate council approves those 3 recommendations as well. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. Stay there. Yeah. No, could you please go back? Yeah, that's right. Goal of facility asset management planning through the lens of greenhouse gas reduction and energy conservation principles. Replacing or renewal of assets at their end of life or beyond their serviceable capacity would fall under 2 categories. Those that would attribute little or no contributions towards greenhouse gas reduction, and those have got high financial and environmental benefits relatively within reasonable period of time. Unlike in the past, these assets that attribute to greenhouse gas reduction are expected to undergo through some transformational changes or system-wide upgrades to meet their goals. Hence, a cluster of assets or a system-based changes are inevitable to meet our goals. In the past, we have made the funds distributed over a number of facilities to sort of help move everything all at the same level. But this time, the change in our greenhouse gas reduction, in our policies and the mandate of 2030 and 2050, we are changing our strategy to sort of look at things all in a transformational way so that we can move more effectively and to achieve the goals. Even though it needs transformational changes, the good news is the administration of the implementation part is relatively easy. In other words, significant synergy will be realized through transformational project approach. Single large-scale project is relatively easier to manage than multiple small-scale projects. For example, project management of one $5 million project is easier than 5 $1 million projects. It's where you have no multiple procurement and no multiple contracts, no multiple consultants or permits, etc. So large-scale projects are generally easy to manage by 1 or 2 resources. The next bullet, how facility acceptable performance level are to be determined under the above context. So, sorry, can you go back to the next slide, but the second bullet, yes. Performance level of an asset comprises 2 primary components and 1 secondary component. The performance level or the level of service, we interchange at times. The structure, they have but primarily two components. The first one is the structural integrity, level of structural integrity. And the second one is the functional need or capacity adequacy. These are the two simply different criteria in order for us to meet the service level. And there is a secondary service level, it's a third one. We call that as a cosmetic preferences. If I take a minute to sort of explain that one, is a structural integrity it has got no failure, or it's all done by the design, but it may not be able to meet the capacity. If you need 5 rooftop replacement, 5 rooftop units, we may have got only 1. So the capacity is not sufficient to sort of supply the air to the required area. But the integrity is a structural integrity is a design and its safety and all that. And the third one is a secondary one, is a cosmetic preferences, whether we need a Cadillac versus Volkswagen type of thing. It's generally it's a preferred comfort level that can be somewhat subjective. The third bullet is a prudence in budget development and resource balancing. We acknowledge the funding increase in the last budget cycle does help significantly to staff and for the operational staff, the frontline staff. And we thank you for the council and senior management for making that one available. Our findings and the new greenhouse gas energy management targets indicate slightly more funding requirements. Kevin Van Oudegem will expand on that one, but I will just simply lay out some key indications. Presently, our project deliverables are made by 3 full-time project management staff and 3 temporary staff. In asset management, the most critical part is to keep the asset data flow smooth between the front end and the back end without having any bottlenecks in the asset data flow continuum, to keep the decision support system alive and current. In general, asset data flow have got 5 sections. These 5 sections or 5 stages in the data flow continuum, 3 of them are at the front end and 2 of them are at the back end. The front end sections or the categories of the data flow is handled by the front end divisions such as engineering, facilities design management. The back end is primarily handled by asset management. The 3 front end are data collections, data quality control, data processing. All these 3 elements will require professional judgment and professional inspection and professional verification. So those will have to stay with the front end. The back end is data analysis and financial parameters and report generation for senior management and council. In this continuum, to avoid any bottlenecks at the front end, resource adequacy is critical. Having said that, I would like to transfer my presentation over to Kevin Van Oudegem. He will take it from here. And at the end, we will be both available for any questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sunda. Next slide, please. So it was great to actually sit through and listen to Sandy's presentation. I think it's nice to reflect on a lot of the capital work that's really nearing the end of completion right now with the WMRC and the East Side Library and the Rim Ball Diamond Pavilion, as Sandy showed. And I think, you know, there's a lot to be proud of there, I think, as a city and as a group for executing that work, really really in unprecedented times, with no exaggeration. So what we're here today to talk about, like Sunda said, though, is maybe some of the less glamorous work. And an example of that is something you see here on the screen. So this is over at the WMRC, but it's not connected to the expansion project. So this is just an example of some of the day-to-day work that we do. But this, what you're looking at on the left there, is the pool tank, obviously without any water in it. And one of the projects that we are just nearing completion on right now is actually refurbishing the 4 hydraulic rams that you see on the right side of that photo. It may seem simple, but that's actually a 240-ton, 500,000-pound chunk of floor slab, concrete floor slab that moves up and down through the water column. It's a quite unique feature at this pool. You can actually change the depth of the pool tank with this system. And this is just an example of some of the sort of work that we do that I think is just worth highlighting here for a moment, and really speaks to, I think, some of the context of the report here today. Next slide, please. So for the recommendations today, I think really the key one here is we're looking for council's approval to release the non-routine capital funding in the amount of $605,000 for the facility infrastructure replacement and rehabilitation needs as outlined in this report. So this is money within the existing capital budget that's non-routine, which is why we're here seeking council's approval to release it. In addition to that, we wanted to take the opportunity to have present some information to council on, like Sunda said, sort of our general infrastructure needs, as well as how they align with some of the great work that Scott's doing for us on the energy and greenhouse gas front. Next slide, please. So at a high level, this is really a companion report to the one that Scott presented to you a few weeks ago. What we're trying to do here as well is, in preparation for the upcoming budget cycle, is really start to look at some common themes and opportunities that naturally emerge between the work that we generally do with our facilities and the goals that this council has set related to greenhouse gas targets. Next slide, please. So in my mind, I think this report really boils down to this idea of what's the appropriate level of service for city facilities. And what I mean by that is, ultimately, what's the targeted funding scenario for city facilities? And so, as Sunda said, since the last capital budget, we know some changes have been made to the targets for facilities. One of the most obvious ones is the greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets. So we're now pursuing a 50% reduction by 2030. And so with that comes the need to support that, obviously, with funding. The other key thing we wanted to highlight here as well is, in conjunction with that, we're always looking at ways to improve the reliability of our key building systems, and in particular on the mechanical, electrical, and building envelope side. So this, in a lot of ways, is our heating and cooling equipment, as well as things like roofs. A lot of what we deal with day in, day out are failures of those systems, which really result in unplanned shutdowns, programming disruptions, as well as emergency funding requests. And so any facility manager always wants to move from a reactive maintenance to more of a preventative maintenance mode. And that's certainly true here at the City of Waterloo as well. I'll use Rink in the Park as a good example of that. We are executing some, I'll call them urgent repairs of the mechanical system over there. And it's not because we didn't know that equipment was nearing the end of its lifespan. It's just that you have to balance the funding with the need. And in this particular case, that equipment failed. Not unexpectedly, I guess, but the timing of it was unfortunate. And because of that, we're sort of, sort of trying to react quickly to that situation. At the end of the day, this boils down to us really wanting to meet, obviously, the community expectations at these city buildings. Next slide, please. So at a high level, our group manages 1.3 million square feet of building worth at least $350 million. And when you start to look at, what is the infrastructure deficit for city buildings? If we look at the data that we have right now, that would work out to about 124 million. And just to give some context to that number, that's really, in some ways, it's a bit of a theoretical number for asset management purposes. It really looks at, well, what if today we addressed everything historically wrong with our buildings? What would that cost us to do? But within that number, that doesn't really account for the engineering and the professional management and risk management that is fundamental to managing a portfolio of buildings. And so, again, that's just a number, but that's not really a funding request, obviously, or anything like that. That's just an asset management data point. And one thing I will say on the topic of asset management, we've been working very closely with Cassandra's group in the development of this report, and obviously we'll continue to work closely with her going through the capital budget cycle. Next slide, please. So I do want to take a moment and identify some positive steps that have happened here. And I think one of those obviously is this council's approval of additional infrastructure funding in order to start addressing that historical infrastructure gap. So 5.6 million over this 10-year period was approved in the last capital budget cycle. And I think that's worth noting here. That's a significant step forward. We also are continuing to work, as Sunda said, on maturing our data and facilities in order to support the good work that Cassandra's asset management team is doing. We've also increased the capacity of our team in the last few years with great success, and in particular with our energy program manager, Scott, who was added to the team here recently. He's be a great asset for us going forward, as well as our mechanical engineering position and architectural position as well. And we continue to look at some new technologies. iGuide is one in particular that we've utilized. This is a local company that has got a lot of traction in the real estate market. These are the virtual imagery that you see when you go on to look at a new home. We're starting to use that technology now across our portfolio buildings as well. Next slide, please. So some fundamental challenges here. As Sunda said, for various reasons, municipalities often get sort of smaller chunks of money spread out over many years. And what that indirectly does, I suppose, is lead us towards more of a like-for-like replacement strategy, as opposed to these more transformational projects that would be needed in order to achieve some of our larger goals. And so what we start to look at is, can we have larger upfront capital investments to support some of these switchover of mechanical systems, as opposed to just replacing individual units as they come up for renewal. And I think that's important when we start to look at our greenhouse gas goals in particular, understanding that we only have 9 years, or really 2 council terms, until 2030. And we still have a ways to go in order to hit those greenhouse gas targets. So supporting transformational projects is going to be important. And of course, it goes without saying nowadays that the pandemic is a significant issue for us, in particular on budgets and supply chain. And that's something we've continued to deal with over the course of this council term and the large capital projects that we're executing. And I guess the jury's still out on, does that sort of stabilize going forward? One would think it would, but when, I think is still a question. Next slide, please. In terms of our current funding scenario, so we worked with Cassandra to look at that, and that's what this graph starts to look at is, with the current funding scenario, how do we perform over the next 25 years? In this graph, if you look at the red and the blue bars, those are sort of the percentage of our assets in facilities that are in poor or very poor condition. And so based on the current funding envelopes that have been approved, you can see that over a 25-year period, the good news is we're not really getting worse, but I guess the bad news is we're not significantly getting better either. So we're sort of maintaining roughly a 50% or 45% of our assets in this poor or very poor condition. And what that really translates to us in our field is that we tend to be dealing a lot with unpredictable failures, in particular of mechanical equipment like at Rink in the Park. Next slide, please. So the real opportunity I think that's emerged in the work that Scott's doing and that I'm doing here is that there's a natural alignment over the next 10 years with mechanical, electrical, and building envelope projects. And I think that's going to be the key for us here going forward in order to achieve our greenhouse gas targets and also to improve the reliability of our building systems generally. So I think that's really the obvious connection here between what I'm doing generally with the facilities and what Scott's trying to accomplish on the greenhouse gas front. And the good news too, as we said, is we're nearing the completion of these large capital projects, the WMRC, the East Side Library. So it's a really good time now to start turning the focus and energy of this group towards executing some of these more transformational energy and greenhouse gas projects. Next slide, please. So just in closing here shortly, the funding gap or the key takeaways in terms of the funding in this report. The one thing I'll say about this is not a target funding scenario. This is not a funding request here today, anything like that. What we're doing is simply looking at the data. And so what the data is showing us is that if we just said, let's replace everything that comes up for renewal within this 10-year time frame of 2020 to 2029, what would that look like? And so we know that based on the data that we have, there'd be roughly $7 million per year of stuff that would come up for renewal theoretically in that time frame. If you add to that 7 million, another 1.5 million, which is sort of the number that was presented to council in Scott's work with the energy roadmap, you get to about $8.5 million per year of investment in order to substantially achieve the greenhouse gas targets, as well as to start substantially decreasing the percentage of poor and very poor assets that we maintain in our facilities. And so again, that's not a funding request. That's not a target funding scenario here today. That's just a number that we're looking at strictly from the data. But when you compare that against what's our current funding portfolio look like, we know that everything added in, we're at about $4.1 million per year of funding for these types of repairs. And so you can start to see that there's a gap there. And so that's something that we'd like to explore further going into the next capital budget cycle. Next slide, please. In terms of today, what we're looking for council's support on is, as I said at the start of the presentation, there's a little over $600,000 remaining to be released in this capital cycle. We've presented two projects here that we feel meet the intent of this fund and would roughly be of this order of magnitude. The first one is the Canadian clay and glass gallery replacement of windows and doors. They're in very critical state and need to be done. This one, we do have a federal grant out for approval. So if we get that grant, we would move on to the next project. If we're unsuccessful in that grant, then the C2G2 would be where we'd spend this funding on. So assuming we get the grant, then we can move on to the next project. The second one on the list would be the Gray Silo Park House roof replacement and mechanical upgrades. Next slide, please. So then just in closing next steps here, I think for us, what we really want to do in our team is work closely with Cassandra and her asset management group to really review this idea of, what's the appropriate level of service or what's the appropriate targeted funding scenario for city facilities going into the next capital budget cycle. Of course, our goal here as a team is to present realistic funding scenarios for council, and that's something that we'll be working towards. But we also want to recognize that we do need to start decreasing our infrastructure deficit across our facilities continually year after year. And so that's something that we want to incorporate into the analysis as well. And so along that vein, we'll be working closely with finance and asset management and looking at capital project requests in the next upcoming capital budget. And I think the key here is that we're really looking to focus in a lot of instances on these transformational mechanical, electrical, and building envelope projects. And with that, I believe that concludes our presentation. So Sunda and I are here for any questions if council has any. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin, and Sunda as well for the presentation on this. Yeah, certainly I have pictures of the windows at Clay and Glass Gallery, and certainly they've had their time, shall we say. So very good. Hopefully we get that grant and can move forward on that project there. I'll just look for any questions first. I see Councillor Henry is ready to comment. I don't see anything further. Oh, there we go. Councillor Bodley, please go ahead.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. My question, I guess, is about I guess my broad question is about how do we make sure as we're tackling the infrastructure deficit, not just for facilities, I know this is about facilities in particular, but I think we really need to look at the asset management planning and infrastructure deficit as an opportunity for us to also be tackling our greenhouse gas emissions targets and goals there. And so it's really great to see this report sort of starting to answer that question or ask that question in a thorough way. And I guess one of my questions or concerns is about for facilities in particular is about the level of service. When we look at that level of service right now, that has no bearing right now on whether or not it is meeting our greenhouse gas emissions goals or anything like that. Like there's nothing there's nothing within that level of service assessment that's saying this asset is in great condition, but it is really badly contributing to our greenhouse gas emissions inventory, and so it should be lower. Is that correct? And if it is correct, how do we sort of find a way to incorporate that level of service assessment in with our greenhouse gas emissions goals?
Yes, through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Bodley. It's a great question, and I think the one thing I will say is in the last capital budget cycle, this council did approve about, I think it's we'll call it $4 million for green building policy enhancements. And so the idea with that is at that time we didn't really come to council and say here's a specific greenhouse gas project that we want to do, but the idea is we had this money And so where we're doing a mechanical project anyways, we can maybe, add a little bit of extra money and get sort of the more energy efficient version of that thing. And so it's very much the same principles that we're looking at applying here. I think what we want to do more strategically going forward, though, is be much more specific and direct in our projects. And an example of that would be Rim Park, which, as crazy as the thing, is 20 plus years old now. And that's sort of a critical time for buildings where those original mechanical systems start coming up for renewal. And so a building like Rim Park that's over 300 square feet, there's maybe 20 rooftop units on it. And so rather than just getting into this, well, let's just keep replacing them again, basically the same one, but maybe a little bit better in terms of efficiency, is there an opportunity to look at that system as a whole and say, well, why can't we move towards more of an air source heat pump or a geothermal well or something like that? And so I think those are the conversations we're starting to explore as a group. To your point is, to try to do these things very strategically and leverage the fact we have to do something with those assets anyways, but try to take it to a more energy efficient level. I guess the good news in a lot of ways is because of technology continues to improve, if you buy a boiler today, just doing a like for like, it's probably going to be of a higher efficiency anyways than the old one. And so you're sort of naturally getting that greenhouse gas improvement, even with a like for like strategy. But I think what we're identifying here is that kind of approach will fall short of some of these more aggressive targets. And that's where we have to start looking at systems as a whole and how we change them fundamentally.
That's awesome. Thanks, Kevin. And I appreciate that. And again, just through your Mayor Jaworski, I think at least if I happen to be sitting around the table again when we start talking about capital budget discussions and infrastructure investments and things like that, I really hope that that this gets illuminated a little bit more clearly, and we really start working in concert towards both of the goals of lowering our infrastructure deficit and also lowering our greenhouse gas emissions. So I really appreciate it, and I found the report really valuable. So thank you to everybody who worked on this report.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley, and over to Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor, and just building off of the Q&A Councillor Bodley just led. I think my takeaways from this report are a couple of key points. One, on where we're at today, the graphing is really sort of helpful to show the rainbow of things that are in great condition, things that are not, in accordance with today's level of service. Former and now retired public works general manager Bill Garibaldi used to talk about our infrastructure deficit in the context of sort of planned deficiency. The level of funding we were able to provide and the way we were able to provide it meant that things were going to go, but they could break and stop at any time, and that's just the level that we were planning on. And then things were getting worse, and that's when we started our asset management journey in earnest, leading to today's award-winning system. That's where we were. Things were getting, just like many places, things were getting worse. And it is useful to see on the graph today that the investments that Council has already made with the support of the community has stabilized the picture, but we're still on shaky ground, and we need to keep making new investments. The second point I take away that I think is very gratifying to hear, and it goes to Councillor Bodley's interest there in particular, is that there is strong alignment between the work we need to do to close the infrastructure gap and the work we need to do to take action, serious action on transformative climate action with our facilities. And that the projects we need to do to make the most impact in the right timelines are very well aligned with the projects we need to do to deal with the infrastructure gap. That brings us to the third piece that I just sort of elucidated a little bit more for Council. With Council's blessing, as chair of the Finance Committee, I've been serving with the city's sort of asset management steering committee, and a lot of the level of service conversations come through from the technical experts for advice and approval through there. Although when there are larger budget impacts, those are conversations we'd have up here, and I'm glad that we've highlighted that. Staff have highlighted that through this report, that dealing with trying to deal with the climate change needs that we have for greenhouse gas reductions in a facility is a change to our level of service that will affect what the graphs look like, what the funding gaps look like, and therefore what the capital strategy looks like, and what the community can sort of experience or see or expect from our facilities. And that's the kind of transparency our asset management framework has been able to bring to this, and it's an excellent highlight that Councillor Bodley raised, that greenhouse gas performance is not part of our level of service in our assets, and facilities are an excellent candidate to have that conversation and to make some choices on how we include those, and then therefore how we plan our capital program. So I think this report was very well detailed, very well presented, and tells us a lot of good things, a lot of okay things, and shows us where we need to do some work in the future, and sets a good roadmap for that. So I am really excited about the way forward on this one. Seeing no further pieces, I think I'd be happy, Mayor, if you would like me to move the motion and vote in favor of it, if that's where we're at.
Yeah, I think we are, because I don't see any further hands up, and thank you very much, Kevin, for all your wise words, and Cinda for your opening on this one. Please go ahead.
So I'll say the words again. Happy to move the motion and to vote in favor of it.
Councillor Bonagor, I am happy to second the motion. If I could just add a comment. It would be disingenuous of us to set aggressive climate goals and then not provide the capacity to hit those targets. And the climate crisis requires us to be nimble and smart with our choice of investments. So I really appreciate the work that's being done at this level, and I look forward to seeing how it continues. So I'm going to vote in favour. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Hanmer, in favor.
Councillor Bodley, in favor.
Councillor Veith, in favor.
Councillor Freeman, in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That is carried by all of us. We are at the end of the afternoon session, so we stand in recess. Please dial in again at 6:15-ish, and I'll see you all then.